Welcome to the Wisconsin Music Podcast.
Hey there, and welcome to the Wisconsin Music Podcast. I'm your host, Zach Fell, and every Tuesday we dive into the heart of Wisconsin's music scene, bringing you stories and interviews with musicians, organizations, and businesses making waves right here in our backyard. You can catch all of our episodes on your favorite streaming platforms, and don't miss our video interviews on YouTube. Don't forget, you can also tune in to Fox Cities Indie Radio every Thursday at 6 p.m. and Sunday at 3 p.m. to catch our latest episodes. This week, we have a special guest joining us, Hans Christian from Alameda Music in Sturgeon Bay. Hans recently got a Grammy nomination for his beautiful album, Ocean Dreaming Ocean, in the New Age Ambient Chant category. Hans' story is really inspiring. He started out as a young cellist in Germany, moved to Hollywood to chase his dreams, and ended up working with big names like Robbie Robertson, Billy Idol, and members of the Red Hot Chili Peppers. He has also collaborated with greats like John Waite and Sparks. Over the years, he's developed a unique sound that really speaks to the soul. Hans also runs Studio 330 or Studio 330, his production facility in the heart of Door County, Wisconsin. There, he not only produces and composes his own music, but also mixes and masters projects for artists from North America and Europe. By the way, our podcast website is going through some exciting design changes. If you're part of the Wisconsin music scene, whether you're a musician, an organization, or a business, head over to our website, fill out the guest request form. We'd love to feature you on a future episode. So, grab your favorite drink, get comfortable, and let's dive into this week's episode of the Wisconsin Music Podcast. Welcome to the Wisconsin Music Podcast. This week we have Hans Christian. He is a Grammy-nominated musician. He owns, he's a recording engineer. He's worked with a lot of different people over his tenure as a musician. So he's going to start off with giving us kind of his music origin story. So Hans, welcome to the Wisconsin Music Podcast.
Thank you, Zach. Appreciate it. Thanks very much.
Thank you for being here. So give the audience just a summary of how you started in music, in way back then, and kind of, summarize up to about where you are today.
Well, it's a long story, but I'll summarize it. So I'm born in Germany, born and raised in Germany, in Hanover, the rock capital of Germany, where the Scorpions are from. And so I started on the cello, played cello for over 50 years now. But I also picked up the bass guitar and was rocking it out in Hanover and then in Hamburg and so forth. So I always had a dual track of classical and rock. I liked both at all times. In 1982, I decided to move to Hollywood. I was 21 years old at the time. I'm the classic immigrant to this country. I had no money. I didn't know anybody. I was staying at the YMCA on Ivar Street in Hollywood. And I ended up studying at Musicians Institute on Hollywood Boulevard, which back then was a really small school. It was a really great school, actually, like 30 students or whatever,
Nice.
Hooked up with a drummer at Musicians Institute, and he asked me a few weeks into the semester there and said, Hans, you want to do a gig? Remember, I'm from Germany, so my English wasn't very good. I said, well, what's a gig? Seriously. So,
Yeah.
I mean, like, you want to play a show? I said, yeah, where? We're at the Whiskey A Go-Go. So
Nice.
Where's that? Where's that? He had to draw me a map on a napkin. I'm not kidding. I wish I would have kept that napkin. So his name was Brock Wheaton. Bless my brother Brock. He's no longer with us. But Brock and I and his brother Mark, we were backing up a performance artist named Johanna Wendt, and she was hot stuff at the time. We sold out the Whiskey 2 nights in a row. The Minutemen were openers. And said, oh my God, life is exciting in Hollywood.
Yeah.
And then the next 2 gigs were at the Roxy, which was the other great club in LA. So I did 4 gigs, and I was in the scene. And then I was just driving, rehearsing, joining bands, leaving bands, practicing a lot, all of that. And I ended up in the 6 years that I initially lived in LA, I ended up working, Solid Gold, American Bandstand. I worked with John Wade. I worked with Robbie Robertson, played on his first solo album, which was a huge honor. Sparks, the Ronald Russell Mail.
Okay.
Billy Idol, I played in a band that later became the Red Hot Chili Peppers. I replaced Flea on the bass and stuff. So then I got into the whole folk music scene in LA, which is really vibrant and strong. Like for years, played with Victoria Williams, which artist from Louisiana. I was her sidekick. Through Victoria, I met T-Bone. I met all kinds of artists and producers, and so the link was that through all these gigs and all these recording sessions that I did, I discovered that I loved the studio. And so while other people were doing funky stuff in the back room, I was sitting by the engineer. I said, "How'd you do this?" "So you're recording my bass. You just put in a DBX 160 on the bass. What does that do?" So I have good ears, always had, because of my classical education. When it's like, how do you do this? And I just was fascinated by it. And so I had a kind of a quick take up on that, I like to believe. And 1988, I produced my first artist, Dave Stringer, in LA. He's now touring worldwide. And then on it goes. I did music for theater. The cello took over. I realized that I'm more than a rocker. I wanted to find my own music. I got into music, like theatrical performances on cello and light projections and all that really far out stuff. And then I settled down musically a little bit. And so I've been producing my own music a lot, and certainly a lot of other artists. And eventually, after LA to San Francisco for 12 years, San Francisco, I moved to Wisconsin.
Okay. So what drew you to Wisconsin?
So I had friends that recorded an album in my studio in San Francisco. They were both from Door County, and they were just great guys. We just became really good friends, meaningful friends, not just LA style friends,
Okay.
So I would visit Door County after we finished the production. I said, "Wow, it's beautiful here." I could never imagine I would move to Door County from California. It's for obvious reasons. But years would go by, and I would come and visit, and then I produced 2 CDs with this singer named Fred Alley, who was a legendary singer and theater person. And life went on. I started touring nationally a lot with my own group called Rasa. Did Indian-inspired music, and we would route the tours through Door County, and we would play here. And boy, people are friendly. Oh, I love the air, and all that. So anyways, I decided to move and make the big jump in 2002.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, are you enjoying the cold weather right now?
Nope.
Me neither.
Actually, I go out there and the air smells good, but it's about 20 degrees too cold.
Yeah. It's
it's difficult right now.
Yeah, but it should warm up hopefully soon. Now,
sure.
Yeah. Now, before we get into where you are now, which is the recording studio, let's take the listeners a little bit on our journey. You've released multiple albums over the years. So maybe give them a little journey of where you kind of started musically and where you have progressed to where you are today.
Right. That's a really great question, Zach. So again, I started on the cello, got into the bass. I had this weird dual track musical development. One thing I never got into was playing guitar. And I also never got into writing songs. I work with a lot of singers. I like to believe that I'm a good producer for singers. But myself, I never felt the urge to write songs or to sing other than background vocals in the studio or to play guitar. So instead I went into Indian esoteric instruments, so my own music was more mysterious because I wasn't a songwriter or a guitar player or a singer. So I had to dig a little deeper to find out what is it that is my musical expression. And I found it, obviously. There was kind of a deep reach for me for a while to figure out what is it. And I discovered that I don't want to boast or anything, but I'm actually a pretty good musician, because oh, that's what I want to do. I want to play really hard stuff on the cello.
Yeah.
I want to do live looping. Oh, I see. So I'm doing looping concerts to this day.
Oh, wow.
And everything has to be played live. There are no computers on stage, and nothing is pre-recorded. I got to earn a living that way,
Right.
But I love doing that, and I love the challenge. So when I play live solo, that is, mostly cello with looping and effects, and then sometimes I weave in some other instruments that I can also then loop on top of it. Stuff.
Okay. Very cool. So when you say you're doing live looping, basically, for listeners out there, if they're not quite sure what that is, and I mean, you probably could explain it better than I can because you're the one that's actually doing it. So why don't you kind of give them a little bit of idea of what that means?
Right. So live looping means that I have devices with me on stage that I control with my feet mostly. So I play a phrase and I feed it into these devices, the loopers, and they play it back. And then I can overdub it. I can add layers to it. I can make the layers longer. I can make the layers play backwards. I can mute the layers. I can erase the layers. That's basically what live looping is. It basically means you record yourself on stage while you're playing, and then you play over it, and then you try to get out of your layers that you created. And so I have certain pieces, that I've developed, and I'm currently expanded my palette with some ambient processors and stuff. So I love ambient music, where the threshold between sound and melody.
Okay.
Is it melodic? Is it just an ambience you're creating? So. And everything has to be played, everything has to be generated on a cello. It's kind of an interesting challenge.
Yeah.
Actually.
So, for example, not only are you probably, using a bowl, you're probably using pizzicato, which is picking the strings as well. Are you using the body of the cello like a percussion instrument as well?
Yes, I am. Actually right now I'm working on that. I'm exploring. I'm using a carbon fiber cello for live, a Lewis and Clark cello with pickups mounted on it instead of a wooden instrument. It's just a better choice for what I'm doing. So I'm finding interesting tapping sounds, that I can feed into a looper or process a certain way, scratching on the bridge and stuff. So,
Right.
Yeah, I'm exploring that right now.
Awesome. Very awesome.
Yeah.
And so how long have you been doing this type of live performance with looping? How long have you been doing that?
I think my first looping concerts were all the way back in the late 1980s when I used a Roland SDE 1000 delay with a whopping 1.5 seconds of memory. So it was great practice because whatever phrase you were playing, you had to be really accurate. It was like da-da-da-da-da-da punch. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da.
Right.
You know what I mean? So, yeah. It went all the way back. I've done many other things in the meantime, but the looping has stayed with me. It's just a fantastic way to play non-classical concerts. I'm not a great classical musician, I abdicated that world a long time ago, yielded it to people that are more talented in that way. But I practice a lot. I'm a good player, just not of the classical repertoire.
Yeah. I mean, everybody has their own, journey through music, and just because
you have to make choices as a musician. The first 10, 20 years, you just have to woodshed to get somewhat good on your instrument. But after 20 years of just working on your tone and working on all those details. At some point, you have to say, well, am I a jazz musician? Am I a rocker? Am I ambient melodic guy? What is it that I like to do? And then you got to continue. You can't do everything, I don't believe. At
Yeah.
some point, you have to choose and say, that's what I'm good at. I love playing, you know, uh, Stratocaster through a Marshall amp. That's my thing. And I'm working on the tone and I'm going to be Stevie Vai style. You know what I mean?
Right.
Totally valid choice.
Yep.
Totally full choice. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like for me, it was like I started cello was actually my first instrument, but I kept breaking the bridge, so my parents said I had to change I got to change my instrument. So I went to saxophone, and then I did the concert band, and I did jazz ensemble, but I don't really find myself really a classical player or a jazzer. I'm more like into like R&B and funk, and so that was my path. So that's kind of like what I do. But I also get to teach kids because that's what I do during the day. Is I'm a band director, so I get to take all those things that I've learned over the years, and I get to pass that on to them. And which is kind of why I do this podcast, is because I get to meet people like you, and your story is going to be passed on to other people.
Mm-hmm.
And with all these stories and everything, now you've done all this stuff with these all these albums that you've put out over the years, and you've worked with a lot of people producing and recording, and now you have a Grammy nomination. So let's talk about that a little bit. How did that all come together?
Right. So, in last year, like February, March of last year, my phone rang, and I got phone call from a kind of legendary producer named Mickey Houlihan from Boulder, Colorado. And he said, hey, Hans, I have some unreleased and very raw material by the late and great David Darling, who was a cellist that was kind of the trailblazer. Okay. David Darling was a classically educated cellist, like I am. He played with a Paul Winter consort in the early 1970s, which became a bit of a reference point in music history. So Paul Winter was a saxophone player. There were some other great musicians in that group. Ralph Towner on guitar, Paul McCandless on oboe, and David Darling on cello, amongst others. So David, pretty early in his life, did some pretty significant recordings with Paul Winter. And then he left the group and he started a solo career and just was excelling at this beautiful, austere, melancholic beauty that he came up with. He recorded for ECM Records, which is one of the best record labels in the world. He did solo albums with Manfred Eicher at ECM. I mean, it doesn't get any better,
Yeah.
And people just loved him worldwide, and he became, a milestone in music, especially for cellists. Now he's older than me, so I'm kind of the next generation. And although I never tried to emulate him, but whenever I heard his music, it's like, oh man, I know what this guy's up to. I love what he's doing. The tone and the processing on it and the depth, So David Darling died in 2021. About 3 years ago now, he died. And so Mickey Houlihan had worked with David for about 40 years. He recorded him all over the world and produced most of his records. And so Mickey had this treasure chest of recordings and raw stuff, because David was an improviser. He would sit down, Mickey would record him, and we didn't know what was going to happen, So there was all this raw data.
Yeah.
And Mickey said, I can't delete this. I mean, it's David Darling. But I think you might be the guy who can do something with it. So he sent me one piece, just raw material. And it was, frankly, Zach, it was a mess. Okay. It was like, okay, I'm going to roll up my sleeves here and sort through it. What can I use? This section. Delete this part. Okay, I can use this. I can move things around. And then I'm going to add a lot of cello. And so I constructed a piece and I sent it over to Mickey, and then Mickey said, "It's fabulous, man. We're going to get all the raw stuff that I have." So I ended up doing an album that we titled Ocean Dreaming Ocean, where I play about 50% of the cello. About 50% of the cello was David Darling. And it was a great honor for me to have, have had this opportunity.
Yeah.
It's like David Darling was for cello what Miles Davis was for trumpet.
Okay.
Okay. That's the level where I put him.
Gotcha.
And we never met in person, but we walked a similar path. Again, I didn't try to emulate him, but I understood emotionally the language that he was speaking on the cello. And it's like, yeah, that speaks to me, So when I had the opportunity to work on these tracks, it's like, I want to stay true to David's sound, but I'm going to have to do some major surgery on these pieces and majorly add to it. And therefore, I've really made it my own. So, yeah, that's the album that got nominated. And it's in the New Age ambient chant genre.
Gotcha.
Yeah, it's a beautiful album. It really is.
So, for those that out there, and maybe even remind me, how does an album get nominated?
Right. Well, it has to be submitted by a voting member. I happen to be a voting member, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't help you or hinder you to be a voting member or not. But somebody who is a voting member and a member of the Recording Academy to say, I'm going to submit this album to the Academy, and then they screen it, and then they'll say, okay, yeah, it's submitted for the right genre, the right category. Sometimes things get rejected. There are certain guidelines, certain parameters that have to fit. And so there's a lot of screening going on. And then it made it into the category. And then there were about 175 entries in that category. And then the voting members vote on that category along with 90 other ones. and say, that's I really like that one. I think that's great. And so that's how Ocean Dreaming Ocean became one of 5 finalists nominations, basically, in that particular category. So from 175 to 5, that's the cut that we made.
Right. Man, I wonder if there's a list out there of all the people that submitted that people can go and search out, because I know there's got to be other great music out there that just unfortunately doesn't make the cut.
Yes. So like I said, I'm a voting member myself. And when you're a voting member, you have to select 10 categories that you want to vote in, because there's too many categories, obviously. So you can select 10, plus you automatically can vote on the 6 major categories: Album of the Year, Artist of the Year, New Artist of the Year, whatever.
Gotcha.
So I selected my 10 categories that I wanted to vote in and that I felt like I was qualified. And then you have to listen. I mean, some of the categories that I selected, I had 500 entries.
Wow.
In one category. So you have to develop a listening technique, speed listening, basically.
Okay.
Yeah. But that was kind of fun. It was time consuming, but I found some really great music. I also found some music that wasn't worth it,
Yeah.
So you got to sort through that.
Right, exactly. Well, that's very interesting how that whole process happens. So you have to be, like you said, you have to be a member of the Grammy voting, right?
Mm-hmm.
The memberships and the Recording Arts.
Recording Academy. So how do you become a voting member? You have to have credentials. So you have to be suggested by 2 other members to say, for example, okay, Hans, yeah, he's a good candidate to be a voting member. and you will be required to show certain production credentials, etc. Like, I used to be a voting member years ago, and then I let it lapse, and then last year I thought, well, the Academy changed a lot for the better, and I said, well, it's a coincidence. Again, I don't have to be a voting member in order to be nominated. Anybody can be nominated.
Okay.
Just to be clear, it just happens to be that I'm a voting member, and now I'm a nominee too.
Awesome. So, well, congratulations, because that's a lot of work. It's, from going from taking someone else's, session work and then taking that and creating something that is, what's the word I'm looking for? Something that person would
cohesive. That's cohesive. Right?
Yeah, right. Cohesive, and the person that music that you're using that is now no longer here has, you're showing respect to that artist by not changing it to the point where it doesn't resemble their work anymore.
Exactly.
Yeah. So congratulations on that. Very cool. Now, the other thing that, besides being a musician, an orchestrator, arranger, is that you also produce and you run your own recording studio, which is located in Sturgeon Bay. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Sturgeon Bay in Door County.
So why don't you kind of tell the listeners a little bit about that part of your life?
Sure. Like I mentioned earlier, so starting in the late 1980s, I discovered that I had a particular interest and maybe even a bit of a talent for the studio environment. I like the creativity that happens in the studio. And so I started building my own studio in San Francisco in 1989. It was my first studio, small, of course. Never had a lot of money. I had to really earn that.
Mm-hmm.
And then, one place to the next place to the next place and so forth. But I think what comes in handy is both my classical education, so I have good ears, I can hear sound, I can analyze what I'm hearing, which is really important when you work in a studio environment.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's actually good that I'm not a singer, so I don't compete with singers. It's more like I can observe and I can sense where singers at within their own potential, So I like different styles of music. That's really important. From classical, I work in classical music where I have to read scores and so forth. I love working with jazz musicians. I love working with rock musicians. A lot of the people that come to me are more acoustically inclined, but don't have to be. But they're all people that are pretty committed to their craft. They want to do something good, and I have a pretty nice setup here. I have, like I said, I can show a little bit. I got a really great high-end board here. I got 4 rooms, loading ramp, guest quarters. People can stay here when they come from out of town. So it's a really comfortable environment. In the summer, I can sit outside in the backyard and relax and so forth. So it's a good thing. The other thing is I work long distance. Of course, everybody does. So I do too.
Right.
Just today I worked with somebody in LA, and that's part of the reality. It's kind of an old model, really, to have a real recording studio. Everybody has just a laptop and whatever. But I'm not sure you get the same quality. So whenever that topic comes up, I basically say, good for you. I totally understand. You don't want to record on the clock. You want to be in your own environment. More power to you.
Right.
Send me the files, I'll mix it with you, for you, because you probably won't be able to get anything as good as what I can get here, So that's one of the ways I'm networking with people, and you have to collaborate in that sense and support people,
Right, exactly. So if people wanted to contact you to work with you, where can they get a hold of you?
So the name of the studio is called Studio 330, Studio 330 in Sturgeon Bay. So you can go to recordingstudio330.com is the studio website, or you can go to hanschristianmusic.com for my personal website is featuring more my own music. The studio website features more the studio with photos and selected projects I've worked on and so forth, technical info, and all that stuff. So
gotcha. And I'll put all that information in the podcast show notes as well, so people can just go click on that as well. Couple of things before I let you go. What if you could go back in time and talk to your younger self, what advice would you give yourself?
Well, sometimes I had a big mouth. There were moments. There were moments where that big mouth. I'm actually really kind of a shy person.
Yeah.
It's a weird combination of being shy and introvert, but then also having a big mouth.
Yep.
I think a lot of musicians have that actually. We're really kind of both intimidated by our own dreams,
Mm-hmm.
So there were times when I wish I would have had more maturity, for sure. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Very cool. Is there anything else you'd like the listeners to know about before we end our conversation?
Well, I think this is a great podcast that you're doing. I love Wisconsin. And what I always do, or what I always offer is when people say, well, I don't know, I'd like to meet Hans or I'd like to check out his studio, get in touch with me. You're welcome to stop by without feeling like you have to do anything here. Just let's meet. Let's get to know each other. And if you want to end up doing a project here, that's awesome, obviously. Yeah. But you don't have to. I mean, we're all in the same boat. I'm a musician. You're a musician. I think I understand what you're trying to do once you tell me.
Right.
And you're like, I'm not the right person. And I will also say that I'm not really a rap producer or a hip hop producer. It's just not my strength.
Right.
There's other guys out there. But I welcome people to just reach out and say, I'm curious about it. I saw your podcast. Curious about maybe can I come by and sit down and talk about music and a possible project.
Yeah,
totally
absolutely.
Fine.
Yeah, exactly. Very cool.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. So, Hans, thank you so much for being on the Wisconsin Music Podcast. This was a great conversation to know more about you and all the great talent that we have hidden here in this great state of Wisconsin.
Yeah. Thank you, Zach. Appreciate it. Thanks very much.
Well, thanks again for tuning in to another episode of the Wisconsin Music Podcast. Once again, I'm Zach Fell, your host and creator of the Wisconsin Music Podcast, where I love to amplify the great sounds coming out of the Wisconsin state. We have great talent here, great support, great listeners. Thanks to Fox Cities Indie Radio for syndicating this on Thursdays and Sundays, along with their other great programming. So make sure you check out the Fox Cities Indie Radio. Thanks again to our guest of this week, Hans Christian. What a great and exciting story he has. Hope you enjoyed listening to all the things about him coming all the way here from Germany, working with some great known artists, doing his own thing, Grammy-nominated, and just all around great guy. So check him out when you get a chance. For those of you who are new to our show, the Wisconsin Music Podcast is dedicated to showcasing the incredible talent of Wisconsin-based musicians and the thriving local music community. Our episodes drop every Tuesday on all streaming platforms and YouTube. Additionally, you can catch our episodes on Fox Cities Indie Radio every Thursday at 6 p.m. and Sunday at 3 p.m. Make sure to follow Chris on Facebook, X, and Instagram to keep up with his latest musical endeavors. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next week with another fantastic episode on the Wisconsin Music Podcast. If you'd like to be on the show, just go to wisconsinmusicpodcast.com, fill out the guest request form up at the top, ask for your email and your name, and then I'll send you an auto email asking you for more information. If you are enjoying these episodes, please consider donating to the Wisconsin Music Podcast. Donations help pay for the website and putting the podcast up on streaming services, and also getting our name out there to all Wisconsinites and others that are interested in our great music here in Wisconsin. Donations are secured through PayPal and Stripe. All you have to do is go to the website and click on Donate to WMP. You can also head over to our Instagram and Facebook pages and like us there. Leave some comments. Also go to the podcast review section of your podcast player and leave a 5-star review. Would be great. You can also head over to YouTube and watch the interviews and leave comments there as well. Have a great week, everybody, and we'll see you next time.